I'm Lauren Conlin, and today I'm going to discuss the aftermath of certain police departments in Massachusetts, mainly the Mass State Police and Trooper Michael Proctor, post Karen Read murder trial number one. And I'm not going to be discussing Karen's alleged guilt or alleged innocence on this episode, just the conduct of Trooper Michael Proctor and other officers. And it's crazy. When we were in the throes of the trial, I wasn't sure if Proctor was going to testify or not. There were so many rumors going around with some of the alleged text messages and some of the sloppiness. And then one day, I decided to make a post on X or Twitter, and I made a reference between Mark Furman of the LAPD and his conduct during the OJ trial, which, by the way, this was a general post. The comparison was that, hey, there's a dirty lead investigator, or seemingly a dirty lead investigator. And I had people say, ugh, Lauren Conlin, you are reprehensible. How dare you make that comparison? Well, I feel like after the fact, that comparison was probably too nice for Michael Proctor. And one could also argue that OJ was not convicted because of Mark Furman. And if you believe that Karen Read is guilty, then you probably shouldn't be mad at my tweet. You should probably be mad at Michael Proctor and his conduct, because many could argue that he is a huge part of the reason that there was so much reasonable doubt and Karen did not get convicted. But anyway, let's get to it. Who could forget the vile words spoken by lead investigator Trooper Michael Proctor on the stand during the Karen Read murder trial, on trial for allegedly striking her Boston police officer boyfriend with her car and killing him in January of 2022. With the murder trial recently ending in July of 2024 in a mistrial, Proctor's words have been echoed across the country. This made national news. So his words were actually text messages, the vile ones that I'm about to remind you of. They were text messages to other officers as well as high school friends that really made people think hard about what was going on in this investigation. And also they made your skin crawl. And these text messages, along with his lack of action in the investigation, has gotten him suspended from the Mass State Police without pay. And some red flags in the investigation itself was the fact that Michael Proctor never went to 34 Fairview that morning, the morning that Officer O'Keefe's body was found. And he also kept evidence in his possession, like Officer O'Keefe's clothes, for months. He did not explain to civilians that offering bribes to officers is wrong. And of course, he also acknowledged that the owners of 34 Fairview wouldn't be in trouble at all because that home belongs to a fellow officer. And then we have the downplaying of the relationships with the witnesses. And then, of course, we have the acknowledgement that the owners of 34 Fairview wouldn't be in trouble at all because that home, 34 Fairview, does belong to a fellow officer. And then we have the Sallyport video, which appeared to be inverted. And that might not have been a big deal at all if it was just addressed in the first place. And I guess that could be argued that that was more on Yuri Buchanan, but then, of course, you have the entire investigation itself, which I'm not going to go into because everybody's heard how poor that was ad nauseum. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But I want to refresh your memory with the audio from a compilation that Microdots put together of Trooper Proctor on the stand. And of course, trigger warning, there are some phrases and words that he states that are really, really offensive.
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead and say them.
She's a whack job cunt. C-U-N-T. She hot at least? Yes, she's a babe. Weird Fall River accent, though. No ass. Is that chick a smoke? If you like women who shit themselves, not bag, as Chief would say. She's got a leaky balloon knot, leaks poo. She responded nothing. Just saw Julie, and she said when this is all over, she wants to get you a thank you gift. And I respond, get Elizabeth one. Elizabeth's my wife. I text my wife, waiting to lock this whack job up. She was a whack job. She's gross. Oh, fuck her, bitch. Trooper Chris Moore, Trooper Jeff Kukowski, Lieutenant John Fanning, Trooper Dave DeChico, and Sergeant Yuri Buchanan. Going through his retarded client's phone right now.
I'm going through his retarded client's phone right now. Who's the retarded client? Who was it you were referring to as retarded?
Miss Reed.
Karen Reed, the woman sitting to my left.
Yes, sir.
Subject of your investigation as a professional, correct?
Yes, sir.
As an unbiased, objective investigator, the person that you were investigating, you referred to your bosses as retarded.
I hate that man. I truly hate that man.
I hate that man. I truly hate him. Correct? That's a visceral response to someone who's just doing a job. Were you upset or annoyed or pissed off that Karen Reed had gotten representation, legal representation, to represent her? How do you feel about him now? He's sitting right there.
I still don't care for him now.
I'll let it stand.
And I think it's amazing that Trooper Proctor actually said that he investigated the death of one of his own with the utmost integrity, except for those text messages. Yeah, no, that's it. And he really wants everyone to believe that. And, you know, I think a lot of people do believe that, because I did see people defending his actions in terms of like, hey, all they were was text messages. Well, that's a huge deal. He is a lead investigator in a huge case, and once again, one of his own. That's horrific to me. Absolutely horrific. But let's get into Trooper Michael Proctor's fallout. So NBC 10 Boston has reported that Proctor, who is currently suspended without pay and under internal investigation, is now a focal point in several other criminal cases in Massachusetts. The Norfolk County DA's office has contacted at least 13 defense attorneys whose cases were investigated by Proctor. In newly obtained documents by NBC 10, the DA's office has issued what's known in legal circles as a Brady letter. So this informs attorneys that Proctor's credibility as a witness might be in question due to issues of potential bias and conflict of interest that arose during his cross-examination in the Karen Reed trial. One of the attorneys who received this letter is Joseph Cataldo, who represents a client indicted in connection with the July 4th murder in Randolph, Mass. Last year. And he says, quote, "I don't know what the Commonwealth is going to do with these witnesses, but I know that we'll be filing more motions," Cataldo said, hinting at legal complexities that Proctor's involvement could introduce in ongoing cases. But the implications of Proctor's conduct, they extend well beyond Joseph Cataldo's client list. Some other cases that could possibly be affected are the murder of a moped driver in Milton in 2021, a child abuse case in Quincy, and the 2020 case of a prominent Dover doctor accused of killing his wife. All of those cases might face new legal challenges, and rightfully so if Proctor, or since Proctor, was involved. So now defense attorneys are basically scrutinizing Proctor's investigative methods and his background, potentially filing additional motions to obtain further information. And a really high-profile case, a great example of this, is the Anna Walsh case. So the disappearance and presumed murder of Anna Walsh in January of 2024, and I say presumed murder because they have yet to find her body, captivated the entire nation. Anna Walsh is a beautiful and successful mother of two, and her husband, Brian Walsh, was very quickly identified as the prime suspect after inconsistencies in his statements and very suspicious internet searches, including, quote, "how to dispose of a body," end quote, came to light. And of course, we have Trooper Proctor at the helm of the lead investigators in this case. So he was in charge with piecing together the circumstantial evidence that eventually led to Brian Walsh getting arrested. The case against Brian Walsh has largely relied on digital evidence, surveillance footage, and physical traces found at the couple's home. However, post-Karen Reed case, the defense attorneys for Brian Walsh are now preparing to challenge the credibility of the entire investigation, arguing that Proctor's role may have introduced similar flaws and biases that could undermine the prosecution's case. Walsh's attorney is already filing these new motions about the investigation. Ugh, That's just so frustrating. I feel like there is so much evidence here that points to Brian Walsh. And again, that is for another episode. I probably should do an entire episode on that. But it's so frustrating because now everything has to be looked over once, twice, 3 times because of Trooper Proctor. So according to NBC 10 Boston, an unofficial transcript of Proctor's testimony has reportedly been circulated among defense attorneys involved in other cases that he's worked on, raising the possibility that all of these lawyers are now going to attempt to discredit him as a witness in their own trials. And Cataldo said, quote, "I'm sure there's going to be a lot of defense lawyers thinking of really creative ways to try to convince a judge that all of this information that happened in the Reed case should be held against Trooper Proctor," end quote. And other legal experts suggest that the broader impact of Proctor's involvement in these cases is still unfolding, and we really don't know what's going to happen. And the legal community is pretty much awaiting the next steps in the Karen Reed case. We had a recent hearing on August 9th in the Karen Reed case, and I will touch upon that in a minute, but questions loom about Proctor's future role in this case as a witness. Will the prosecution continue to rely on his testimony, or will his tainted credibility force them to reconsider? Let's also note the other Massachusetts police officers being investigated post-trial. We have Canton police officer Kevin Albert, who has been suspended with pay for his actions that Proctor described on the stand under cross-examination, how they got so wasted at the Cape that Albert forgot his gun and badge in Proctor's cruiser, and they were driving this cruiser around the night before, allegedly drunk. And Boston 25's Ted Daniels broke this news on July 24th, receiving an email from the Mass State Police that read, quote, "The Massachusetts State Police confirms that Detective Lieutenant Brian Tully, Lieutenant John Fanning, and Sergeant Yuri Buchanek are each the subject of an active internal affairs investigation. The department respectfully declines further comment in fairness to the integrity of the process and pending investigative outcomes. The troopers remain on full duty at this time," end quote. Then the state police followed up with Ted Daniels later in the evening to say that the investigation into Lieutenant John Fanning was no longer active. Their email read this: "The department's internal affairs investigation determined that there was insufficient evidence to prove or disprove the allegation that Lieutenant Fanning violated rules and regulations by failing to uphold the responsibilities of a supervisory member. This allegation has been classified as unfounded," end quote. And as a reminder, Lieutenant Tully is the Norfolk County State Police Detective Unit Commander, and he testified at the Karen Reed trial in June. And Tully was asked about the messages sent by Trooper Proctor, who was suspended without pay, as we know, but Tully was not on the chain of offensive texts that Proctor read in court, and Tully claims he immediately reported Proctor's texts to state police when he learned of them. And as a reminder, Proctor described his text to the jury as unprofessional, but said they had no impact on the integrity of the investigation. Sorry, I laugh because it's just so crazy. And Buchanek, Sergeant Buchanek, serves as Trooper Proctor's direct supervisor, and he testified in June that Reed told him she was framed, and Fanning did not testify at the trial at all. But let's keep in mind, Buchanek, the direct supervisor of Proctor, he was on those text messages and he liked them. He double tapped them. He never once said, "Hey, that's inappropriate. Hey, don't send stuff like that." And again, there's more to this and not necessarily directed to Karen Reed, but many are also aware of the despicable Stoughton police officers allegedly involved in the Sandra Birchmore case. Sandra Birchmore was the 23-year-old Canton, Mass woman who was groomed, allegedly, by these gross predators since she was 14 or 15 years old and was found dead by suicide and pregnant with the alleged father of her baby, former Stoughton married police officer Matthew Farwell being the last one at her apartment. And I have a full episode on that case on Primetime Crime that we recently did, if you are interested, and 2 episodes of Sandra's case on this podcast, The Outlier. And let's talk about the hearing on Friday, August 9th. There were arguments to drop 2 of the 3 charges against Karen Reed, and I will just read the charges as followed. There was second-degree murder, manslaughter while operating under the influence of alcohol, and leaving the scene of personal injury and death. And there were recent statements from the jurors that suggested that they were only undecided or hung on the manslaughter charge. As a result, Judge Cannoni had agreed to hear arguments from Reed's defense team as to why the charges of murder in the second degree and leaving the scene should be dismissed. So she heard the arguments on Friday from both the defense and the state and should be making a decision this week. I wasn't super impressed with Lally's argument. I felt like there was a few things that he wasn't necessarily truthful about. I know that some of the members of the jury came forward days after the trial resulted in a mistrial, and Lally had said, oh no, it took weeks or months, and that's just not true. They came forward days after. So Cannoni should be making a decision either this week or next week. I have a feeling she's not going to dismiss them, but I feel like if the state really wanted a conviction, they would have a way better chance if they did dismiss them and only charge her with manslaughter, since that's what they were hung on. And per Adam Lally's most recent statement that he filed, he stated that the jury was 9-3 on guilty of manslaughter. So if 9 people thought she was guilty, then I feel like they, again, have a way better chance of getting her convicted on manslaughter alone. So why not drop the other 2 charges? Okay, everyone, that is it for today. I somehow landed back in the world of Karen Reed, and still we don't have justice for Officer John O'Keefe, and that is just heartbreaking for his family and for him. But I have a feeling that this will not be the last that I will be covering this case. It's just been a while. So if you like this podcast, don't forget to rate and subscribe on Apple or wherever you listen. And it's available on YouTube now at Pop Crime TV. And don't forget to watch my other show on Wednesday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern, Primetime Crime Live. I'm Lauren Conlin. Thanks for listening.